Good morning. Today is Wednesday, February 16th. My name is Ron Morris. This is Moving Forward TV, your local Tampa Bay real estate and mortgage update.
And I am Delynn Gaston. Welcome to our show. This week we have Attorney Gary Lyons on. We're very excited to have
today.
Gary with us.
Absolutely.
But before we get started,
Comic of the week.
Here we are. Okay, we are very excited to have with us today Attorney Gary Lyons from McFarland, Gould, Lyons, Sullivan Hogan law firm in Clearwater. Gary is the senior partner overseeing the real estate division of the firm, and he is extremely busy these days, as you can imagine, with all of the real estate, short sales, foreclosures, things like that are going on right now.
And Gary's been doing this for over 30 years. He is constantly getting questions from realtors regarding short sales, foreclosures, different things to do with real estate. And Gary, why don't you kind of start us off from there?
Well, thank you, Ron, and Delynn, thank you for having me today to talk to your audience. I found the comic that you had earlier to be quite timely, in that in preparing for this talk, I titled it "The Landmines on the way to a real estate closing." And I find that even though we're in a distress-related environment right now, where sellers are in foreclosures or banks are trying to liquidate their portfolios, the same reoccurring problems still come up today in real estate closings as they did 5 years ago when we were in a different time. We real estate lawyers in Florida are oftentimes affectionately known as dirt lawyers. That's D-I-R-T. And I thought I would use those letters today to be the acronym for the four very common areas of concerns and issues that come up on the road to a real estate closing. The D is probably the most reoccurring, that being disclosure questions. And the law in Florida for a residential sale of real estate requires a seller to disclose all material facts that affect the value of the real estate that aren't readily observable to a buyer. Now that law sounds pretty clear at first blush, but of course, when you start fleshing it out, it gets a little more complicated. It's easy if you have an electrical system that's not operating. Clearly, you have to disclose that. But what happens if you've repaired that electrical system? Is that still a material fact that you must disclose because it affects the value of the property? What about if you have a sinkhole on a neighborhood piece of property? Next door, probably should disclose it. I think that in that case, it affects the value of your property. What if it's 5 houses up the street, or 3 neighborhoods away, or in the same town? Now, I don't have the answers to these questions, but these are issues and questions that are raised to me all the time, and I want you as real estate agents and sellers to understand that when in doubt, disclose. Some of the more interesting issues that come up on disclosures: what if there's been a death in the home? Well, I don't think a death necessarily is something that affects the value of the property, but perhaps sometimes if there's a grisly murder in a home, I think that such an incident must be disclosed. We have other issues that involve noisy neighbors. What if your neighbor next door has a 15-year-old daughter who likes to play Lady Gaga at 2 a.m. in the morning on her brand new stereo at full volume? Well, I think that might be an issue that would need to be disclosed. It is a material issue that affects the value of the property.
Lions and tigers and bears.
Let's now turn to the letter I on my DIRT acronym. Inspections. We find more and more real estate transactions nowadays being as is, where is, subject to the right of inspection. Unfortunately, I find too many of the contracts simply have a very brief clause that gives the buyer the right to inspect the property within, let's say, 10 days. That just doesn't seem to give a lawyer, at least, enough detail to be able to keep realtors and sellers from being accused of all different sorts of dastardly deeds. You need to add more detail. An inspection needs to have not only the time during which it needs to be performed, who's to perform it? Does it need to be a licensed professional, or can it be grandma? Does the buyer have to designate what it is that he found that he didn't like? Or is it strictly a carte blanche, I just don't like the way the sun came up this morning, therefore I'm not going to proceed with this contract? The one item that I find most often omitted is how much time does the buyer have after the inspection period to give notice to the seller that he's either going to proceed or not. That problem area causes more and more angst in a real estate transaction than most. Let me now turn to the letter R in my acronym, which is a bit of a stretch. I'm going to call it the right to assign the contract. All too often a buyer in his anxiety to quickly get a contract submitted will send it in with his name, sometimes not even with his spouse's name. And as time goes on, the typical buyer's remorse or for other reasons, he decides that he wants to add his wife, or maybe he doesn't really want to proceed with the real estate closing. So buyers have gotten somewhat clever over the last few years, and I see this coming up more and more. They will ask to assign the contract to an LLC that they've just set up online the night before, figuring that, well, now they can go ahead and renege on the contract, and the only exposure perhaps is the $500 deposit they may have put in place. There's no real remedy of a specific performance against a company that has nothing. When you do a contract, please address the issue of assignment. I would suggest that you insert in the contract that the contract may be assigned, but the buyer remains responsible for performance of all obligations thereunder. Otherwise, you will find all too often that as you approach a closing, if a buyer is getting cold feet for any reason, the issue of assignment will come up. The other factor to remember is that if a contract does not mention assignment, it is assignable. That's the law in Florida. So if it's silent on the issue, it can be assigned, and a buyer will oftentimes stumble on that clause to be able to find a way to escape liability to perform the contract. Let us now turn our attention to the last letter, the T in my DIRT acronym. Title issues, the dreaded title issues. All of us have been to real estate closings when suddenly, at the last minute, the agent walks in and says, "We have a title problem." Nothing can derail a closing worse. You'll have the buyer and the seller each with their U-Hauls out in the parking lot with all their belongings ready to move off to spaces unknown or to the new home. The real estate agent has his or her commission check already spent, and suddenly the deal doesn't happen. I suggest that when you start a real estate relationship with a seller and you take the listing from them, you might go beyond simply checking the title assessor's index to see who owns the property. They try their best to indicate the proper owner, but I assure you that there are other potential owners or encumbrances or liens to a piece of property that can come up at some time during the process which will or can derail your closing. It's quite beneficial, I think, to a seller or even to the real estate agent to spend the few dollars necessary to have a title agent do a preliminary, what we call an O&E search, an ownership and encumbrance report. It will show you if there are any other, perhaps grandma who's been dead 20 years that might still own an interest in the home, whether there are some other beneficiaries from an estate that have an interest, or more importantly, whether there may be some judgments, some IRS liens, some child support claims. All those issues can cause a real problem when you arrive at a closing to find that the seller does not have the wherewithal financially to pay off those liens and convey clear title. It's a problem that comes up. It can be addressed early on in the relationship before you as real estate agents have spent many hours and many days and lots of effort trying to sell a home, only to find that the seller simply cannot sell it.
You know, that is very interesting. Speaking of the title issues, you know, this MERS, the mortgage electronic recording system that we've been charging over the last few years, the lenders have been charging, that's got to be wreaking havoc in the title world as well.
It sure does. I mean, we, of course, have to pay off mortgages at real estate closings, and we spend hours, if not days, sometimes trying to track down the true and current correct owner of the mortgage. It's amazing that you have hundreds of thousands of dollars in a check to hand to somebody and you can't find out who to give it to. I mean, the system, I'll be happy to send it to you, Dylan.
I'm just trying to help.
You know, you would think that would be a really simple thing to process as well, but apparently it presents its hurdles from time to time.
It used to be, but nothing is easy anymore. The new normal is, not normal.
Yeah, really, it is.
Well, we really want to thank Gary for visiting us this week. We really appreciate it. I personally learned some stuff on that. Hopefully the Realtor audience out there did as well. If anybody needs to find Gary, his banner is over here. I think we've been flashing his phone number, so by all means, give him a holler. And their firm's wonderful. And again, we really thank Gary Gary, for joining us this week.
Thank you. Thank you, Dwayne.
With that, let's move on to our movie challenge. We want to say congratulations to Lisa Haas, who is a future buyer, actually, and thanks to her realtor who forwarded her the show to watch because she's looking into buying a 203K home, perhaps. And we wanted to say congratulations to Lisa. Two
Good
movie
job,
tickets
Lisa.
on your way, and here's this week's movie challenge.
Left cheek! Left cheek! Left cheek! Left cheek!
And for those who didn't catch it, Young Frankenstein, I think Dylan forgot to mention the name
Putting
of the
on the
movie.
Ritz.
Yeah, Putting on the Ritz was a great movie. I think this movie challenge is going to appeal to probably a slightly different audience, but I'll let you guys determine that out there.
With that, thanks so much for visiting our show. Please visit our sponsors as well.
Don't
That's our
forget
show this
to
week.
blog us down below, please. Forward,
Twitter,
Facebook, that's stuff that I know nothing about.
Thanks so
See
much
everybody
for
next
visiting
week.
us. We are.
Moving forward.
Bye-bye.
Say, Waldorf, I was wondering if maybe you...
Darn, I better get some new batteries for my hearing aid.
I fool him every time!
You and I are mortal, but rock and roll will never